This is a new species of gecko from New Caledonia, and it is a giant aquatic gecko from New Caledonia.
Aquatic.
14 to 16 inches long. It's giant, and it's aquatic. It has webbed feet.
Hey, welcome back to the Gecko Cove Connection. I'm really excited today to have Rob Haneisen on the show. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Rob, you were actually one of the first people I reached out to via Morph Market, actually, to go and check out some of your geckos. You have some gorgeous gargoyle geckos. And, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to have you on. I've seen your stuff on Instagram, and you're always one of the people that catches my eye the most. So obviously you're doing something right. So I thought I could definitely try to pick your brain. Have you always worked with geckos? What's your story as far as, keeping reptiles?
So I started breeding reptiles about 25 years ago. And when I started breeding reptiles, one of the first gecko species I bred was leopard geckos. And this was back when leopard geckos had 3 morphs. You had high yellow, jungle, and you started to have tangerines, and that was it. And at the time, I was living in Florida, and I had access to Rich Zukowski at Surf & Co. And I also had access to the Brants, who ran Gourmet Rodent, who had a very large, both reptile importing business, but they bred a lot of corn snakes and they bred a lot of leopard geckos. And they were actually one of the originators of the tangerine line, and eventually that became carrot tails and things like that. So that was kind of when I started, and that was in 1997. So I'm
very cool.
Kind of dating myself as to how old I am.
It happens to the best of us.
But I started back then with leopard geckos and colubrids, California king snakes, things like that. That was when I was living in Florida. When I moved back to Massachusetts, where I live now, I really got pretty deep into Hunter and milk snake morphs and black milk snakes. And that was back when tangerine albinos were new. And they were a really exciting species. I loved breeding and keeping large colubrids that feed easily right out of the egg, are very tractable, and have great colors. I wrote some articles for Reptiles magazine. One of them was, it's actually still a pretty popular breeding and husbandry guide for black milk snakes. And around 2002, I was intrigued to look at Leachianus geckos. So Leachianus geckos were really my entry into New Caledonian geckos. Everybody usually starts
it's usually the crested, but if you're starting at that point.
I started with Leachies.
That's
so
awesome.
2002, I got my first Leachianus gecko, and got my second one in 2003. Bought it from Dawn Hamper at a big reptile show in Pennsylvania. And about a year and a half later, I was able to get those to breed. So that started my New Caledonian gecko collection, I guess. And I grew it really slow. I mean, I've been keeping Leachianus now since 2003 and breeding them. But I've grown my collection very slow. And I really focused on Leachianus. I really loved the size. I thought their behaviors were very intriguing. If you keep them correctly, they're super hardy. They're bulletproof as long as you keep them correctly.
Right.
And I liked coming out of breeding a lot of colubrids. One of the things that I really liked about the Leachianus is they didn't have a lot of babies. You didn't have to take care of a lot of babies. It was a very, if you were lucky, you would get, 3-4 clutches of 2 eggs a year, and that was it. So I liked the fact that you were able to keep a pretty diverse collection and not get overrun with babies.
Huge bonus.
So I really focused on Leachianus for a good 10 years. Built up my collection, holding back some really specific babies, and then also buying others to increase the diversity of my collection with localities. And
so speaking of localities, if you don't mind me backing up a little bit. So did you start with the GTs? Did you start with the island forms? What was your first pair that you got?
First pair was just a mixed locality.
Okay.
Looking back, they probably were either Moreau or Pine, but they were just sold as like an island locality. Again, in 2002 and 2003, there were some breeders that had specific localities, and a lot of times they're just like, this is a GT, this is an island form, and that's really all that matters.
Sure.
So yeah, my first pair was a mixed locality island form, no GT in them.
Was it easy to come by them at that point, or was it pretty sparse? You took what you could get.
You had to look for them. You had to. They were not readily available. Even at a big show back then, you would see maybe a handful, and there were only specific breeders that had them. Back then, that was Robbie and Don Hamper. Phil Tremper had them back then. I think Steve Simelli came with Leapin' Leechies. I think he came onto the scene probably around 2005, 2006.
Okay.
So Don Hamper was definitely one of the early people, as well as Tremper and Philippe de Vauchelet.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting some
guys
some
who wrote the
geckos.
book.
So I had geckos from Philippe. Once I got into Leachianus, I'm like, I'm going to get geckos from Philippe, and I did. And the same thing with getting geckos from Steve. And so I eventually built my Leachianus collection, and I was really happy with just keeping Leachianus for a good 10 years. And then once my collection got to a size that I'm like, okay, I don't want to go any more numbers wise on Leachianus. I really like the numbers that I'm having. I want to diversify my collection. And that's when I looked at gargoyles. And I honestly just got into gargoyles probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I was just like, these will be fun. It'll be something colorful. Pretty much the same husbandry, just more insects. And they are a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. I love the colors. But I took the same philosophy with starting my gargoyle collection, and I did the same thing with my Chihuahua collection, is only buying from well-known established breeders who had great lineage, and either buying the best hatchlings that they had or buying hatchlings that came from their best lines that maybe weren't expressing the best color quality. So if you knew what the parents looked like and you knew what the lineage was, and you're like, okay, the best ones from those are $3,000. I can't afford $3,000, but I could afford this one for $500. That's a sibling. And that kind of philosophy, it gives you diversity of lineage in your collection, and it gives you fantastic surprises when you're breeding, because you're crossing different breeders' best lines, and all sorts of stuff pops out. I saw that. I see that with my Leachianus collection. I see it with my gargoyles, and I'm starting to see it with my Chihuahua as well. It's an approachable way to get into some really cool species, where if you don't have a giant bank account, you can still kind of get into that niche collection mentality without thinking you have to have the absolute best. You can buy the best. You can buy from the best breeders, but you don't necessarily have to get their absolutely like A++ specimen, just as long as it has that genetics and lineage.
And
so that's kind of how I got
into
gargoyles.
That's all. I mean, that advice, if people are truly listening to this podcast, I mean, truly listening, take note of that. We've talked about it on the show before, and I've heard that from some of the best breeders I've worked with. And I'll be honest with you, when I first heard that, right, I'm like, okay, this sounds right. However, are you just trying to sell this ugly gecko to me for $500 where I could buy the same ugly looking gecko? They're not really ugly. They're gorgeous either way, right? But are you just trying to move that gecko at a higher price because you're like, oh, it comes from these parents? And I'm telling you right now, if you're thinking that out there, it's a totally different ballgame, right? You can get a gorgeous looking gecko that is the best gecko out of 12 babies, right? And it's not going to throw the same quality babies as this mediocre looking gecko that has the lineage. So, you know, I think that's great advice for anybody looking to build a collection. If anybody's listening to this podcast, multiple episodes, you've heard it from multiple people. And if you hear something time and time again, there's probably a grain of truth there. So, yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, because I didn't believe it at first. I'll be completely honest with you. And I probably have some geckos that look a little prettier, that I'm interested to see what they produce. Right. And then I've got this one gecko that I know comes from great lines, and I've only gotten 3 babies out of it so far. Every baby is absolute fire. It's nice. Fantastic. And so I'm really excited to keep pairing that to newer, even better bloodlines, and see what that can produce. So
what I love doing is blending bloodlines to add diversity. One of the priorities that I have with any pairings is vigor and size. Where I'm looking at structure, I'm looking at size, I'm looking at how quickly the parents grew, how consistently they were in eating, because those are my first priorities. You know, a lot of people look at like color and pattern. My first priority is size, vigor, growth rate, consistency with eating. Because to me, you can build color and pattern on top of a really healthy gecko. But if you have a gecko that maybe the parents aren't very big, their structure isn't the greatest in the world, they took 4 years to mature, why would you want to then take the best genetics you have and throw it onto basically a bad platform?
That's a great way of saying it. Well, and I've noticed that, you know, a lot of the babies that you put on social media and put up for sale, I look at the age that you say, oh, it hatched at this date. And I'm like, that's a 3-month-old gecko. That's huge. Yeah. Right. And that's a testament to you following through with what you just said, is taking that solid platform, because I have some geckos that are just monsters. They're absolutely huge, and they grew fast, and it's exactly what you said you're looking for. So maybe we'll work together down the road with that lineage, you know. And then I do have some geckos that, you know, I'll probably weed out eventually because they are such slow growers. And, you know, maybe their horns aren't the best, or their, you know, snout is really short. What else do you look for other than size and horn structure? Is there any other form with the gargoyle that you look for?
I'm basically looking for, like, if just kind of eyeballing a gecko, like, okay, does it look stocky? You know, does it in your hand? Does it feel muscular? Does it look athletic? I guess is probably the best way I like to look at them. I'll look at, you know, is there symmetry in the head? You know, is the head structure, does it look like it fits the body? Is the body long but not chunky? Because chunky gecko, I mean, you don't want like a gecko that's like, oh, look at this gecko, it's 85 grams. Be like, yeah, because it's obese, because you've probably just been feeding it baby food. That's why it's that big. But I've seen 100-gram gargoyle geckos that are not chunky. They're just huge. They're just a mammoth gargoyle gecko. So, I mean, I'm looking at structure. I'm just looking, okay, does this gecko look like it is athletic, that it can, I mean, if you think about what gargoyles are predators. They're a predator gecko. And you want to look at not a gecko that's just going to kind of sit on a branch and be like, hey, look, I look cute. No, you want a gargoyle that's like, I'm going to mess you up if you come next to me. That's
they're the little bulldogs of the gecko world.
They really are. So that's kind of like the physical structure that I'm looking for them. And then I'm looking at like color, and I'm looking at pattern. But to me, it's physical structure, but growth rate, consistency of eating, how well and easily they switch to insects, things like that. And, you know, I've heard before people just like, how is that gecko so big at that age? I think the one thing that a lot of newer breeders don't do with baby geckos, and this applies to Leachianas, this applies to gargoyles, this applies to Chihuahua. I can't say whether it applies to crested or not. I have never kept a crested gecko in my life.
That's a statement in this hobby.
I skipped that part, and I did.
No, you went in reverse.
I did. I went in reverse. But what to me the key ingredient to getting your baby geckos to grow well, it's actually 2, is heat and humidity. A a lot of people, they think that, not a lot of people, but some people think that you can keep Leachianus at room temperature. You can't. They need heat. Same thing with gargoyles. Same thing with Chihuahua.
Yep.
They don't need a lot of heat. But I keep my babies in heated rack systems where the back of the box, so it's a 6-quart tub, the back of the tub is between 78 and 80 degrees using belly heat tape. And the front of the box is about 72.
Okay.
And
so you got the gradient.
They go back and forth. When they eat, they then go to the back of the cage to help digest, and their belly is on the floor of the tub. And then I put the food in the front of the cage, so they have to come out to where it's cooler to get their food, and then they go back to where it's warmer to digest. And you keep I give them a very light misting every other day. To keep the humidity probably between 60 and 80%. But the box is never wet. It's just, it has a nice amount of humidity. I never have shedding issues or anything like that. But I think heat is really the missing ingredient that a lot of breeders don't think of, because they think, oh, they do best at room temperature. It's like, they can do okay at room temperature, but they're not going to grow. Yeah.
But I think that's where it comes from, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You know, people wanted to have a prescription for the general public. Yeah. Right. How do you not kill this so you don't come back and ask me for a refund? Right. And here's this powdered diet, right? And we're going to sell you because it's the easiest thing in the world, which it is. Yeah. It's the easiest feeders, you know, it's kind of like dog food, right? It's almost as easy as dog food. And then we also say room temperature because, hey, you don't have to buy any kind of heating elements. So it's even cheaper. So it's a sales technique.
Yeah.
But also, as we know, not everybody's good with humid environments, right? Especially if you're not consistent or don't know what you're doing. And so what I've kind of learned, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, please, is that if you mix high heat, not even high, but, 80, 82 degrees with low humidity, that's where we get into some major trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to stress out. I mean, geckos, chameleons, whatever, it's going to stress them out. Heat and it's going to stress them out. It's going to dehydrate them and they're going to die. And then the opposite is true as well. I mean, if you keep them too moist and too cool, they're going to get respiratory infections or fungal skin infections and they're going to die. So
we got to dial it in.
Yeah. I mean, every gecko that I sell, I send a personalized care sheet and hope that the person follows it.
You expect people to read?
I've made a habit of like when they're like, oh, when I read this, I'm like, thank you, you read it.
Yes.
Thank you. So
you get a discount next time.
Yeah, exactly. Care sheets that you get directly from a breeder are invaluable. One-on-one conversations that you can have with a breeder. I mean, this is when I got geckos, this is how I learned of one-on-one conversations with breeders, and books. There's, this book. Everybody should have this book.
There you go. Right there.
And, for Leachianus, everybody should have this book. You see, the thing that's frustrating with social media is that, people are like, where can I find information? I'm like, there are really good books. There's even some articles that you can find online. Well, I talked to this person and they said, no, please don't do that. Just read an actual either article that's been like vetted by editors and is published, or book. It's like all that stuff has just been verified. Even if it's slightly older, it's still valid because the care for Leachianus really has not changed. The only thing that's changed is when I first started keeping and breeding Leachianus in 2003, we didn't have Pangea. We didn't have any of the diets. We were using baby food mixed with vitamins and calcium and adding in live pinkies and adding in live insects. And that worked pretty good. But I think the diets that we have available now have a much better nutrient profile. They really get all of the micronutrients and the vitamins and minerals that we need. And that's what I use. I use a variety of different commercial diets, plus live dubia and live crickets.
Okay. So kind of going back to that, because you have the perspective, we hear a lot about the baby food era. If you listen to any, information about old school kind of keeping with that versus the Pangea, obviously the nutrient profile we just went over is better.
Yeah.
What are the major differences you see? Are they more active? Do they produce better? When you switched over, was it a radical difference or it's better, but not a huge difference? You didn't notice as much?
Oh, it was definitely a difference.
Okay.
They grew faster. One of the big differences between using baby food and using Pangea or any other prepared diets, I use Pangea, I use the Leap and Leachy's diets, and I use Black Panther Zoological. Those are the three that I kind of swear by. Protein content, you don't have that in baby food. Baby food's loaded with carbs. It's got all the fruits that they like. And maybe that works with crested geckos because crested geckos don't eat as much protein.
You didn't mix in the turkey dinner blend?
No. I would occasionally take dubia and throw it in the blender with the baby food and blend all that together. So I was kind of doing what a lot of the diets are anyways. But the big difference between the prepared diets now versus the baby food era is calcium and protein. That those amounts are the amounts that you need for your geckos, whereas back then you were really just playing witch doctor of like, okay, let's put some calcium powder in it, let's put some Reptivite in it. What else do I got in front of me? I'll throw this in it too, and hey, it ate. Great.
There you go. Blending pinky is not as easy.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. And back then I would offer live pinkies as a supplement. I don't do that anymore, and I don't have anything against it. I just don't think it's necessary. And I think the only thing that I don't like about using live pinkies now is the fat content is really high. Whereas dubia, in particular for Legianus, that to me is the perfect live food because it has a great mixture of calcium, fiber, and protein. And
they're just a fantastic feeder.
Yeah. And I have my own dubia colony, so I can grow my own dubia. I can grow my own gecko food. I'm like, this is perfect. And dubia are the easiest things in the world to keep and breed, as opposed to crickets. So.
Yeah, as long as you don't get yelled at with whoever you live with, that you're breeding roaches in your house. That's always been the trick for me. I should have had them before I got married. Yeah, exactly. Which, I think people, not to go off on too much of a dubia tangent, but there will be a few that get out. And I think there's a reason why they're, illegal in Florida is because they could survive. Where, we're both in colder environments and I have not had an infestation in my basement. I know some females have gotten out in my basement because I found them while cleaning up little things. And we're it's not the infestation that people think about when they think of roaches. These things just crawl into a corner and die.
They do. They crawl into a corner and die, and they're either going to die because they don't have access to water, or they're going to die because it just gets too cold. Or in my basement, a spider's going to kill it. So,
yep, there you go. Exactly.
That's one thing I've noticed with keeping crickets and dubia in the basement is I have a pretty healthy spider population in my basement.
And you don't mind them as much because they keep control of everything.
Yeah, I don't like spiders, but I'm like, okay, you're doing your job. That's fine. Just do it over there. That's fine.
Yeah.
We don't have any
keep the webs up high, keep them in the corner, but
no, they're all on the floor too. I mean, it's I'm not saying I don't have a spider infestation in my basement, but it's and we don't have any dangerous spiders in Massachusetts, which is great. It's like the only spiders we get in here are sometimes you'll get like a small like wolf spider, but even them they're not going to do anything. Most of the spiders we have are just like common basement spiders or American
daddy long legs or.
Yeah, no, the daddy longlegs aren't the ones we get so much. We get like grass spiders, wood spiders, and There's one. It's called an American brown spider. It looks almost like a brown widow, but it's not. It's not a brown widow. But I actually, on another tangent, so I keep isopods too for some of my cages that are bioactive. I find more loose isopods in my basement than anything else. Because you take a piece of cork bark out of a cage, you put it on a table or a floor. There's a couple isopods that are going to fall off of that you're never going to see. And then they crawl off into somewhere, and they can survive anywhere. I mean, they could survive a nuclear blast. So
yeah, they're pretty hardy, and unfortunately, the ones that are worth a ton of money aren't as hardy. But wouldn't that be great? Just breeding rubber duckies and having them,
So. I bought some rubber duckies once, where I got some in a trade once, and they lasted about a month, and they all died. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this again.
No, they're cool looking though. I get why people like them.
They're cute.
Yeah. For an isopod, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so you breed your own roaches. We're talking about protein content.
Yeah.
And I agree. They're great. I hate crickets. Actually, fun little story real quick. I've had the same cricket. I always buy baby crickets because if I buy adults, they're going to live forever and they make all the noise. And anything that makes my wife hate the hobby, I just try to avoid it. So
good advice.
Anyway, take that one. But I've had this cricket, and it's in my my one and only Chihuahua tank, and I'm like, the Chihuahua, it's a great hunter. It's going to get it right. It's been a week and a half of this thing all night long screeching. I mean, I'm like, man, the longevity on this. I finally, right before this podcast, I'm like, you know what? I am finding this sucker. I know which bin it's in, right? I'm banging out all the cork, trying to find it. I finally found it, and I killed it 10 seconds before jumping on with you, and I was ecstatic. I am so happy.
Mounted on your wall.
I just smeared it. Made a mural of it just to warn the other crickets not to mess with me. But no, it's great. But crickets are easier to feed. Right? You throw them in there. They're active. They get chased after, especially with the gargoyles. Do you ong feed? What do you do with the roaches to get them interested?
So I'm really anti hand feeding. And I put tongue feeding kind of in that same category. I will tongue feed, roaches, just to get them started. Particularly with Leachianus, because Leachianus, the easiest thing about feeding dubia to Leachianus is because they're so cage defensive. So I wait till at nighttime, open the cage. They're going to kill anything that goes in the cage. So you put a nice big fat roach on the end of a tongue, stick it in there, wham. That's easy.
Nice.
But with dubia, I'll typically put them in a bowl. And I think that the trick to getting geckos to eat dubia is you put them in a bowl overnight. But it's the bowl placement that's the big secret. You want to put the bowl on the floor of the cage, but put a piece of cork bark right next to it. So the gecko can basically attack from above. That's what they would be doing in the wild anyways. They'd be in a stealth attack mode. So put a bowl of dubia below a piece of cork so they can basically go to the end of the cork, look in the bowl, see the movement, grab it, and run. And that's what they'll do. They're not going to grab it and eat. They're going to grab it and they're going to run. And you want to give them a place to do that. That works like with 80% of my geckos on first try. What I notice with Chihuahua in particular, they'll eat dubia pretty readily when they're young. And then when they get to be about 30, 35 grams, they're like, I don't like dubia anymore. I want crickets. And they'll attack and eat dubia, and they'll like, I only want one, and they won't eat anymore. Whereas crickets, they'll chase all of them down. So I think with dubia, and sometimes with gargoyles too, crickets are more active. They're gonna enhance that prey drive that I think is much more prevalent in gargoyles and Chihuahua compared to Leachianus. I'm starting an experiment, and I got this idea from Paul Morlock from Rack House. So I got some geckos from him a while back, and he and I were talking about using morning geckos as a supplement for gargoyles.
Yeah, because they do eat other geckos in the wild.
And morning geckos are a pretty close substitute for I think it's the Bovia robusta geckos. There's a small, soft-bodied gecko that is native to New Caledonia that's probably pretty regularly preyed upon by gargoyles.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, yeah, go ahead and send me some morning geckos so I can start a colony, and I'll see if I can look into adding them in as a supplement. What he was noticing is that his females were laying year-round when he was supplementing their diet with live morning geckos.
Interesting.
And I think it's just, again, it's getting back to protein. It's getting back to trying to replicate natural diet. And if you think about it, most wild animals are conditioned to breed as much as they can when it is a season of plenty. It's like there's lots of food. This is when we breed. Because typically you would have cycles in nature of drought, famine, season of plenty, drought, famine. So you have to take advantage of those seasons of plenty. When animals are kept in captivity, it's always season of plenty. And that's why we get such massive production out of animals that you wouldn't see in the wild. And it's also why our geckos are bigger than what you would see in the wild. There are no 80-gram gargoyle geckos wandering around in New Caledonia. I remember
if they are, they're bosses. You know?
I mean, I remember when I first saw gargoyle geckos, and this was in Orlando. This was when the Daytona show was actually held in Orlando. So this was so this would have been in like 98 or 99. And I remember I was at Tim Title's table looking at gargoyle geckos, and all they had back then were reticulated. That's it. It was like, these are the new geckos from New Caledonia, and gargoyle geckos. And they were adults, and they were maybe 50, 55 grams. And that was considered a normal size. And now we see they've gotten bigger. It's because we've raised them for generations under optimal conditions. And that's what's going to happen.
Which is actually interesting that you say that, because, you know, I talked in a recent podcast about F1s versus where we are right now with the high color and you know, we talked going back to structure. And one of the things that, you know, I saw a few of them actually at Tinley, was they were relatively big. Now, I don't know if they were just older geckos, and again, because they're optimally fed now where they get bigger. But I think that some of those first generations, the genetics are so strong that with the right conditions, they get much bigger than some of the ones we're breeding now. So even though they weren't naturally that way in the wild, they had the potential with the husbandry we have now. That makes sense.
I think that makes total sense. And I also think that's why we see problems in other breeding projects with other reptiles. I mean, I always think about what you see going on with crested geckos right now, where physically they're a mess. And you know, I don't keep crested geckos, so I'm kind of saying this definitely from an outside perspective. But everything that I've seen from them, I'm like, this was a really cool gecko that's been ruined. So
what do you think went wrong there? Like,
just
I always compare things to dogs.
Yeah.
Like, because with the bulldogs, you know, it was smushed in their face. They can't breathe. Yeah. What went too far, in your opinion, with the crested gecko?
People prioritized morphs and color versus structure.
Okay.
And they mass produced unhealthy structure animals because they were exhibiting a color and a morph. And you breed that back. That's why you have crested geckos that don't have nostrils or look like something you'd put on the end of a fishing hook and not necessarily in a terrarium.
Right.
You know, I understand the morph race. I understand the race that breeders get into when it's like that you want to create something new. But I think when you're creating something new, knowing that the chances of you creating something unhealthy are pretty significant, I question the logic to that, and I question the responsibility of a breeder that does that. I mean,
what I learned not with geckos.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna.
Go ahead.
I'm not bashing crested geckos or crested gecko breeders, because there's a lot of them that are really cool. But
there's so many people that are working to remedy that have seen that, right? And so, especially, you know, some of the people that I've worked with and I've talked to about this, so much of the lineage conversation and the structure conversation have really become a priority for a lot of these breeders, because they see that, you know, they could go off the deep end pretty easily in a negative way. And so they're trying to bring that back. And I think that with the responsible breeding, and as much as we all hate that we're sort of in a, you know, downtime for gecko sales right now, and people are, you know, getting out of the hobby because they thought they'd make a quick buck. To me, that's sort of a good thing. It's a correction that needs to be made, because it's going to take the serious people, the people that do care about the animals and the structure and the health. We're going to be sticking around. You know, I mean, it's like I live in Chicago, right? I'm not a Bears fan. I'm a Packer fan. So don't unsubscribe just because of that, please. But I give credit to my wife. She's a Bears fan, no matter if they win or lose. And through most of our lives, they lose, but she just loves the Bears. She loves cheering for that team. I love cheering for these geckos and, you know, doing the best I can for them. So I'll be around hopefully for a while, and you've been around for, you know, a great amount of time. So clearly that you have some passion there. And so we're going to do the best by them. So I see this as a positive overall. Right.
I think it could be. So, I think what you're talking about, like, you know, where the gecko market is right now, and people getting out and things like that. I think a lot of the people that you see getting out, these are people that during the pandemic really went hard in on buying up a lot of geckos or snakes or whatever it was, because the market was ridiculous then. But the thing is, people who, if their window of history was pretty short, their view was like, well, this is what it's like. You get these things, you sell them, you make a lot of money. And that's not the case at all. I've been doing it a long time. Lots of other people doing it a long time. If you're keeping and breeding reptiles to sell them, you know that the markets and prices and what consumers want, and that's both nationally and internationally, it's going to change. And if you're getting into keeping animals and breeding them and producing animals, you better really like those animals, because you might end up keeping them all. So I think a lot of people were motivated to get into certain reptile projects by money, because they saw that they could do that. And for a couple of years, you could put anything up and it would sell. And things were selling for really good prices. A lot of people right now are saying, "Oh, everything's crashed. The market's crashed." It hasn't crashed. What has happened right now? This is a correction. This is a classic correction, because we went way off the charts during the pandemic when people had lots of extra money. They had extra time. They had so much time, and the money that they did have, they couldn't spend it on anything, because you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't do anything. You're stuck at home. So you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to buy 10 snakes and see what I can do with that.
Because it's cheaper than lumber at that point.
Yeah.
You know, so you're even building something.
So what's happening right now? This is a correction. I mean, there are some things that, you know, that have been really oversaturated that might never come back. And those are some of the international markets. But those international markets, particularly Korea, things like that, you're talking a smaller population of buyers. And once they had all of the geckos or all of the snakes or whatever it was they were buying, and figured out, like, okay, this is how we can produce our own, that market closes, because they're not going to be taking anything in, unless after a couple of years, the people who were doing that over there, they also got out. And then now there's a renewed demand because there's no supply over there. So, you know, I've told people this before, is that, like, you know, if you're investing in animals, and when you have a collection of animals, I mean, it's an investment. It's an investment both in money and it's an investment in time. Make sure that it's worth it something to you personally, so that when you have leaner economic times where you're not seeing the return on investment that you expected, you're still getting the return on your interest and on your personal interest, not necessarily on your credit card debt that you
financial interest.
Things.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Well, and I was lucky in that, you know, my wife is a math genius, and I hope my kids get her intelligence with that. And she reins me in. I saw a gecko even today that was, it was actually at a big box store. I saw a gargoyle gecko for the very first time. And, you know, I really tend not to buy from big box stores for a lot of different reasons. But this had a beautiful red base. You can go see it, you know, right now on social media. I posted it. And it was not a stellar blotch, but it had really nice blotching. And for, you know, they were discounting it for me because I was talking to the manager, just saying I wanted to see if it was a male or female. Like, oh, I'll give you 40% off. It's been here. Nobody wants it. And I'm like, seriously? I didn't buy it because I'm very selective. I only have so much space, and I know what I can handle, and I want to grow really slow. And I'm already producing babies that are not flying off the shelves. You know, they're beautiful babies, but I don't need to produce just to produce or buy just to buy. And so when you're building your collection, you want to be very strategic. And luckily with my wife, the way she was and still is, I have a budget. I am completely neutral at this point. If I, you know, want to sell all of them right now, it's for a profit. Which is pretty awesome. You know, where people who unfortunately invested thinking they were going to have a quick turnaround, you know, might have put that on a credit card or, you know, overstretched themselves. And I feel bad for people who did that because you know, to me, I expect to get nothing out of them. If I do, it's a bonus. So
I think that the best advice to give to people who are starting out, if they think they want to have a reptile collection of anything, is go slow and think of it as a long game. You know, people who are just starting out and they want to buy ready to breed animals, wrong decision. Don't do that. A, babies are cheaper. B, buying babies, you get to experience the entire growth cycle of the gecko, of going from a kind of drab looking baby to this stellar looking adult. You miss all that. And not only do you miss all that, but you don't gain the firsthand knowledge of raising a gecko up to sexual maturity and then breeding it. And there's a huge boost that you get to yourself as a keeper and breeder of being able to accomplish that. Whereas if you skip all those steps and go straight to like, oh, I'm going to buy ready to breed animals or even proven breeders that, you know, for some mysterious reason somebody is getting rid of, you know, then
because they're not producing.
Then you're, and you know, by buying babies directly from a breeder who can show you lineage, who can show you pictures of the adults, you know the entire history of that gecko. It's not like, well, it went from this person to this person to this person. They had it for a while, and now I have it. And isn't it great? Be like, who knows what the heck you have? You know, you know, we don't, you know, we don't microchip our geckos or anything like that. Although I think there are some people that do.
Yes.
But, you know, just
I think it was tried and didn't work.
So it's like, so I think that the thing is start slow. If you're going to build a collection, build a collection based on like, okay, you start out with one thing, you're able to do that successfully, use the funds from that to then diversify your collection. That's what I mean. I've been doing this for 25 years, but that's why I went really slow. I don't have hundreds and hundreds of animals or anything like that. I have a still manageable size collection, and it's because I didn't have a ton of money when I started. And so this was a matter of like, I honestly, when I went into it, I didn't get into reptiles and breeding or anything like that with the idea of thinking I was going to make a lot of money. I only said, I want to do this so that I can buy the things I want and be like, okay, so at the time I had leopard geckos, I was like, I'd really like to get Honduran and milk snakes one day. So if I breed leopard geckos for 3 years, I really liked leopard geckos. They were fun. They were a lot of fun. They were cute. They were cute. My wife loved them. She thought it was hilarious. Like, they would hatch and they'd be like, ah! And she's like, oh, they're so cute. What is it going to do?
Oh, that's awesome.
But so I was just like, okay, I'm going to use all of those funds to pursue my next project. And that's a really long, slow road to do it. But you learn a lot along that way. And you also learn that what you thought you were going to like, sometimes you don't like. You're like, oh, I really want this particular species of snake. You get it. You keep it for a year, and you're like, I don't like it. I didn't like it the way I thought it was going. And sometimes,
but if you buy 20 of them, you're stuck.
Exactly. Especially if you buy 20 adult ready to breed ones, and then you're really stuck.
And then you got to sell them for a loss, right?
You're definitely going to sell them for a loss. So just my advice to you is just go slow. Get species that you're going to enjoy, but start off slow, and don't necessarily think you have to breed. I heard this on another podcast. I forget which podcast it was on. It might have been on one of the either the Herpetoculture Network or Morelia Python Radio, where they were saying that one of the downfalls to the hobby right now, and why we're experiencing a little bit of a downturn because there's oversaturation in certain markets, is because the idea of breeding has been romanticized. And I forget who said that, so that is not an original quote from me or anything like that.
Sure, but it can still be true.
I think it's absolutely true. People think that if you're getting into reptiles, you have to be a breeder. You don't. You don't. You don't. You are no less successful of a reptile keeper if you don't breed versus keeping an animal really well and having it be really healthy and raising it up from a baby to adulthood. You don't have to breed, because people, I think that the step that people miss is that when you think that you have to get certain species, keep them and breed them to be a successful keeper, you forget the work that goes into then trying to sell those offspring. And that's a completely different skill set that a lot of people don't have.
It's a job. It really is. And not only that, but just personally, I kept reptiles for years. I kept leopard geckos, right, their entire life, raising them up. One of my favorite leopard geckos was an Afghanicus that I got. It was my second leopard gecko ever. And having that from a baby all the way until the day that it unfortunately passed, right? I've had bearded dragons, and, having different morphs and, raising them up and seeing the different life stages and working on custom enclosures. So instead of buying 50 enclosures, you've got one enclosure that you just deck out and you spoil them and you do everything you can. There's a lot of joy that comes from that. Yep. I'm assuming you kept reptiles as well before breeding.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was a little kid, when I was like 10 or 11, I had a golden skink. I had an eastern fence lizard. It's like a swift. These are just like pet store lizards. So this would have been something I bought in like the late 70s, early 80s at just like a pet store. I had an iguana when I was like 12. It lived for like a year before. Pet. Yeah, they're awful pets. And back then there was like very little care. I mean, I got it as a baby, and it lived about a year until it died. And this is like worst example. The first snake that I had as a pet was a Burmese python.
Oh, nice.
This was in 1991. It was when I got back from basic training from the military, and I was like, all right, I got a little cash. I'm going to buy a snake. And it was looking through the Want Advertiser, which was like a printed classified publication, and they had all sorts of stuff in there. And I called up a guy, and he was about an hour and a half drive from me, and it was an 8-foot Burmese python. I went and got it. I didn't have a container with me. I put it in a cardboard box. It got out in the car on the drive home. I kept I'm driving home.
What not to do.
Yeah, it was like everything what not to do. Didn't tell I had moved back to my parents' house for a brief period of time. Didn't tell them I was getting a snake. I didn't know that my dad was deathly afraid of snakes.
Especially an 8-foot one.
So I surprised them. They went away for a weekend, and I did this while they were away. And when they came home, I was like, "Hey, I got a surprise for you. I bought something while you were away." And I came down and I had a Burmese python around my shoulders. My dad like ran out. He was like, "What did you do? What did you?" So,
and that's the story of his first heart attack.
Yes, don't do that, kids.
No, definitely not.
Yes.
Oh man. Yeah, but there wasn't as much information. That's one thing that's beautiful about today's world. It's a double-edged sword technology.
It is.
But the amount that you can go and really almost passively, like you don't have to try very hard to get halfway decent information, right? You should be reading a book. You should be reading articles. You should be doing more research than a YouTube video. Okay. Yeah. If you're getting all your information from me and Tiki, you're doing something wrong. Okay. It's still great information, but do a little bit more. Right. And, but we live in a world where you can get that basic information before you go and buy an animal or figure out, is this a dry species or a humid species? Is this something that's going to be in a 20-gallon tank its whole life? Or is this cute little snake going to turn into an absolute, Goliath and require its own bedroom? Right. And so, even 20 years ago, right, you didn't have access to things like that very readily. And so that's a beautiful thing about today, for sure. Speaking of information, right, we're always looking for new information. We're trying to gather it in new places. And you were lucky enough to come to my neck of the woods around Chicago, come to Tinley this year. And I did not get to go to the Gecko Symposium, but was this your first time at Tinley?
It was. I've never been to Tinley before.
What'd you think? Was it what you were expecting? Let's start there.
The show itself was actually better than what I was expecting. I've been to big shows. I've been to Daytona several times. I've been to other big shows as well. I thought Tinley was amazing. I thought the diversity of what was there was really top notch.
Spot on.
There were a ton of geckos there. I mean, there were all the ball pythons and stuff like that, but that's fine because I mean there was such an incredible diversity of other species there, and there were a lot of geckos there. A lot of geckos. Yeah. That was pretty cool. And
I do my walkthrough just of geckos. And what's fun is I'll even watch other people's walkthrough of, Tinley or Schaumburg. And I'm spoiled because those are the only two shows I've ever been to other than small local shows, right? I've never been anywhere else. So I have only dated supermodels, right? And so I don't know what everybody else is like.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit spoiled here, but I watch other people's walkthroughs. I'm like, I didn't see that gecko. I didn't see that animal, and there's so much to see. Almost 3 days isn't enough.
Yeah.
Especially how crowded it is. Yeah. So I couldn't imagine how overwhelming it is not coming every year. Right. And just coming for your first time and being like, okay, I got to see it all.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it was, and the thing that was cool is that there are a lot of breeders. There are breeders there that I've met before and breeders that I know. But there were breeders there that I hadn't met before. That was really cool to kind of meet them face to face, but also see them on tables and things like that. For me, though, the highlight of the weekend was the Gecko Symposium.
Tell me about that.
So it was organized by Nick Esposito and Russ Gurley, and it was on Thursday. So the VIP entrance for the show was Friday, and then you had the Big Tinley show for Saturday and Sunday. On Thursday, though, was the Gecko Symposium. So it was an entire day from like 9 to 5 of a lineup of speakers all on geckos. And a lot of it was like field herping, captive husbandry. It was amazing. It was such an informative, and very relaxed and personal setting. There were about 120 attendees, and I think there were 8 or 9 presenters, and each presenter had about a 45-minute presentation where They're on a stage. You had a PowerPoint presentation. Some of it was very academic. Particularly, I forget the name of the presenter who gave a whole presentation on analyzing nutrient content of specific live feeders and how you can manipulate that in collections versus wild collect. It was fascinating.
That is cool.
But there were some amazing surprises in it. So Sari Ducat gave a presentation on tokay geckos, specifically on familial relationships in tokay geckos, like familial relationships on how you have pairs that will raise their babies and take care of their babies. And she had video. I had no idea that tokay geckos, I thought they were just mean, loud, big geckos. And they're amazing, the amount of intelligence that they show and the amount of bonding that they show with cage mates, and how you can kind of translate some of that into recognition for people that they interact with. I'm not anthropomorphizing anything. I'm not saying like they love anybody or anything like that, but they recognize, okay, this person is someone I see regularly, so they're part of my environment. I think it goes as far as
what's a threat, what's not.
Exactly. She was amazing. She had a great presentation. Justin Julander gave a presentation on knobtail geckos. And again, these are species that I don't keep, and I'm only like tangentially interested in. But the presentations were fascinating. Steve Sykes from Geckos Etc. gave a really informative presentation basically on the global market for geckos right now, because his company, I've used his company exporting geckos to Korea and Taiwan, and he's been to all those countries, and he deals with keepers and customers and breeders in those countries as well as Europe. And he gave a presentation on like, here's what it's like all over the world for what different countries, what different regions of the world are like right now, what their shows are like. It was amazing to see what the restrictions and rules were on keeping and breeding on just keeping reptiles or trying to sell a reptile at a show in Japan or Germany, where they regulate how many hours an animal is allowed to be in a cup on a table, and then it cannot be put in a cup on a table for 3 months after that. If it doesn't sell, you can't put it back on a table for 3 months because it's spent its time in it. I think that's in Germany at the ham show. And then in Japan, you have to have specific licenses on what you're going to keep, and they have very strict restrictions on space and cage requirements and things like that. He talked a lot about the culture in Korea, on how that fueled a lot of the boom in certain species, and then once that fad basically has expired, they move on to the next thing. And it was a mixture of explaining different reptile cultures from around the world, as well as the different business markets for reptiles around the world. It was very informative.
That's so cool. So what you're telling me is not everybody thinks like Americans when we're dealing with things?
No, they don't.
Really? Yes. Wow. What a concept. Yeah, no, I mean, I almost want to have him on the podcast, honestly, just to chat about that again, because that is such a great topic.
Steve is great.
Yeah, if you can give me his contact information, if you have any, let me know.
Yeah.
But seriously, it's even just talking to some people in Canada, the differences there versus here. It's people look at animal husbandry, and one of my favorite YouTube channels is I think it's I'm going to butcher the name, but it's a really big leopard gecko channel. The girl doesn't show her face. She's got great information on just the general care, but the standards, you can tell, are higher in the UK than they are in the US. And I think that's why people gravitate.
A lot of countries have like specific requirements on cage size And that's what deters a lot of people from having big collections in those countries, because they don't have a warehouse. We can have a fairly sizable collection in our basement. You can't do that in a lot of countries. I mean, a lot of countries don't have houses with basements.
Don't have basements.
But even if they did, they wouldn't be able to keep. And the advancement of keeping large collections in racks, that is not even legal in some countries in Europe, where they're just like, nope, you can't keep racks. I think it's Germany, where you can't keep anything in a rack. If you want it, it's just, they just outlaw them, and it's like, okay,
and pros and cons to all these things, right? We're trying to do things for animal welfare, but I think sometimes people who make policy aren't actually in the industry, and it's not that just because you're in the industry, you're going to do the best thing for animals.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of both, right? And so just like I think there's be some people who say, tubs are the worst thing in the world. You should never keep a gecko in a tub. Well, it dries out so quickly where I am. And until I can afford PVC, which is one of my next steps, you know what? It does a lot better than this thing over here, the glass enclosure. So it's what's best for my animals.
Yeah.
But maybe people just don't understand it quite yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a matter of like understanding like what's the best conditions that you've seen in your environment for your animals. And that's where, like, whenever I've sold geckos, I think I've got all 50 states now. I'm close to 50 states now.
That's
multiple
cool.
countries and stuff like that. And I tell people, I'm like, listen, I'm in Massachusetts. We have a pretty temperate environment where it gets really cold in the winter. It gets pretty warm in the summer, and we have a lot of in between. But my gecko room and all my reptiles are in the basement of my house, so that in the summer, I hardly spray any of my cages in the summer. I don't have to. It's 70% humidity usually in here. And
that's awesome.
In the winter, because I heat my home primarily with a wood stove, it dries out a lot. So I'm not only trying to keep the room cool enough to cycle all of my animals, but also I need to make sure it doesn't dry out too much. So it's like, okay, I'm kind of playing a balancing game of like, all right, I want to get it down to about 58, 60 degrees in the winter, but I also don't want it to be super dry. So that's when I'm doing more spraying to make sure I keep the humidity correct in the cages. But I also need to make sure it doesn't get too warm, because I want all of my geckos to go through a good winter cool down. For better breeding.
Well, and that's
success.
The balance everybody has to figure almost out on, not necessarily their own, but for their own region. And that's where local breeders, if you can connect with them, people who are experienced in your community, are invaluable. It's fantastic.
And not only local breeders, but just buy a hydrometer.
Yeah, that's true. There are tools.
There's I mean, that's the one thing that's available now that wasn't available when I first started out, is if you wanted to buy a hydrometer in 1997, it was hundreds of dollars to try and find something that was
really,
you couldn't find a lot of that equipment. Whereas now you can buy,
Amazon, you can buy a 5-10 pack of,
you can buy, the digital infrared thermometers. You get those for $15. Whereas
I've got it there.
Back when I started out, it was the heat gun was kind of the only thing you could, and those were like $100. I mean, they were great, but they were $100. And
it's expensive.
Now you can find, you can get plenty of these little, digital infrared thermometers that are only $15. You can buy hydrometers for like $10. And it's just, it's buying. It's
never been easier.
No, it's never been easier to have the right equipment so that you don't have to play a guessing game. It's like, I can't tell you how many times people just like, I'm having a problem with this. What's the temperature? Well, I think it's between, how do you know that?
Yes.
Go and buy a digital thermometer, one of the infrared thermometers, so you can take spot readings, both of like, what's your warm zone, what's your cold zone. Now and take them multiple times throughout the day. It's Yeah. Again, it cracks me up when people are like, "Oh, I'm going to buy $1,000 gecko and go super cheap on caging and equipment." It's like, no,
Why?
don't do that. Don't do that. Or
No.
I'm going to buy $1,000 gecko and do no research on what it needs, and then ask everybody on Facebook, "How do I take care of this thing that I just spent $1,000 on?" That I don't know the
Please
name of
don't.
I don't know the name of the breeder that I bought it from because I got it at a show. I didn't get the person's card. I don't know what sex it is. Can somebody tell me? And what locale do you think it is? It's like, oh, come on, please.
Right.
You know,
Well, what locale is the gargoyle?
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Oh man. So I'm completely jealous getting back to the symposium
Yeah.
because I did not get to go. I tried to get off work and it just didn't work out for me. So I'm hoping, I know they don't do a Gecko Symposium every year, but hey, maybe in 5-10 years they'll do another one.
They really
one thing
should.
I did hear.
Not to cut you off, but I wish more shows did stuff like this. I went to one other show before, and it was an NARBC show in Pennsylvania. I think it was the one I went to in 2003, where they had a separate room off of the main, where they were having presentations throughout the day. Trooper Walsh did a presentation on green tree pythons.
Nice.
I mean, and I wasn't into that stuff back then, but I went and sat in because I was just like, this is really cool. I've read this guy's name in Reptiles magazine, and now he's right there.
Right.
And just
because they are mini celebrities.
They are, but they also have so much knowledge to share. And when you get that, I think what we've been missing now compared to 20 years ago is there's not enough face-to-face interaction to impart knowledge. And if people are getting things digitally, I think you absorb it differently than if you do face-to-face, either on a podcast or at a show or at a herp club meeting, or anything like that, where, you know, you're able, I think you just absorb it differently. Whereas if you're just looking at it online, you're like, okay, yeah, I know that. It's like,
right.
You do, but you're taking it in differently. And I just wish more shows did that.
I agree. And I think thinking about it a little bit more, I've never been to Flora Fauna. Have you been there?
No,
it's only like 2 or 3 years.
Next year though, because it's only about 3 or 4 hours away from me.
Yeah, so there's you're lucky there, and I got to travel a little bit, but it's something that basically, from what I've heard about it, they have little sessions and seminars like that, which I love. Right, so I think more of that is better, like you said, and even in, you know, I'm in education myself, and there are different organizations where we'll have a 3-day, you know, you pick, you know, your story, right? So we have sessions, and each session there's 8 different things you can pick to go to, based on what you want to learn. And I think if we had something like that, even if it's not straight geckos, it's just reptiles in general, you could use some of the information from, you know, maybe not the exact same species, but a different species, and kind of learn about all these different creatures and different husbandry techniques. And maybe you'll get into a new species, so it could be a good, you know, sales technique, you know, or, you know, we could talk to each other and not be so isolated, so that we realize that there are some similarities in keeping certain species, where we could share some of the, you know, knowledge and spread that and just make more connections. I think that's, we're social creatures, right? As human beings,
we should be.
So I think more interact. We should be. So to do that would be fantastic. Were there any major surprises at the? I heard there was a little bit of a bombshell released.
There was. I didn't know this was coming either.
What was the bombshell?
This is a new species of gecko from New Caledonia. This is
the first time I'm seeing it. Wow.
So this was presented by John. I'm forgetting his last name. He's from Gecko's Geckos, and he also works for Pangea.
Yes.
So he gave a presentation on this. This is a new species of gecko from New Caledonia, and it is a giant aquatic gecko from New Caledonia.
Aquatic.
14 to 16 inches long. It's giant, and it's aquatic. It has webbed feet. Um,
Okay.
when I first saw the picture, when I saw it, I was like, it looks like a hybrid between like a Saracenorum and a Chihuahua.
Yeah.
Just the way the head structure is and the length. And this is a picture of the first field collected one, so it has a regrown tail.
Okay.
So John's presentation, they did not disclose the locality or the location of where it was found in New Caledonia. It doesn't even have a name.
Sure.
It doesn't even have a name yet. And
This is brand spanking new.
it's brand spanking new. They have 3 specimens that they've collected.
Okay.
And they went and they did a field expedition after a blinds salesman from Germany. I think it was from Germany. He did a field herping expedition. Was told to go to a certain area because they thought there were some pretty cool geckos there. He took a bunch of pictures, sent them back to an expert, said, "Hey, what is this?" And they said, "That's something we've never seen before." They found out the location of where he got the photo, and they did a field expedition. John from Gecko's Geckos was there. He was part of the crew, and he caught one of the geckos. They found 2 specimens there. One of them was on a rock wall at a waterfall.
Okay.
And the other one was by a stream bed. And it actually like tried to escape by going into the water, and they were able to catch it.
Wow.
They don't know if they're live bearing. They don't know if they can lay eggs. There's very little that's known about them. I think they did look at the stomach contents, and there were some arachnids that were in the stomachs. So there were, and I think there were also some seed pods. So it sounds like it has a pretty typical New Caledonian gecko diet of basically, figs and whatever fruit it can find, and then whatever crawls in front of it, it's going to attack and eat.
That's so cool.
The size is pretty amazing that you would have, a 15-inch gecko.
And just for comparison, an average lychee is how big? Just for people.
My biggest is close to 15 inches. But this one, I mean, you can see it's pretty slender. To me, I mean, to me, it looks a lot body-wise like a Saracenorum.
It does.
It's very slender, elongated, but that's pretty huge. At the Gecko Symposium, all the attendees, we got Adeline Robinson drew this based on the photo of the first one that they found, and all the attendees at the Gecko Symposium, we got this in our gift box. So that's
awesome. See, and now I'm really upset I didn't go. Well, one, because I didn't hear about this firsthand.
I didn't know.
Two, not only did you get to hear about all this, but I love Adeline's work. I know you've got 2 photos behind you there. I've got the same gargoyle one. Those are just the ones nearby. But yeah, I mean, so to get a copy of a brand new gecko that she drew, that's a double whammy, awesome experience. So, so cool. With it being web feed, now the one thing that I'm thinking about is that when I heard before we've talked about this that there was a new species, another large gecko, because that's pretty much all I heard. There was some buzz when I was at Tinley. I wanted to see, okay, is this going to jump into the hobby like the crested gecko? Because the crested gecko was thought to be extinct, and all of a sudden they're prolific. And yes, it's going to be expensive at first. But hearing that it's aquatic, I highly doubt that people are going to want to put setups where we have, it sounds freshwater. Yeah. But, being potentially on an island, it could also, we might find out that it's, adapted to diving marine life, and
it seems like the locality of where it was basically semi-montane. Like higher elevation, cooler, stream side, like mountain stream type thing. So definitely fresh water. The fact that it's probably a very limited population area the fact that it's gone until somebody's found it, it's just like, okay, it's probably just really specific to this region. There's probably not a whole lot of them. They're being very careful about disclosing where they found it. to protect it from poachers.
Yep.
And I agree with your point about the fact, okay, if this is basically an aquatic or semi-aquatic species, that really ups the husbandry needs, which would eliminate it from a lot of people's ability to keep and reproduce them. It was interesting. One of the speakers, they were talking about the proliferation of crested geckos within the hobby, and how people how the native people in New Caledonia feel about that.
Right.
They're not happy.
Really?
Because they view that as the native people in New Caledonia have a very strong cultural connection to the wildlife from their island and from their homeland. And they look at it as, okay, these are animals that originated from our homeland that are now all over the world. And they've been taken from our homeland and taken off New Caledonia to go someplace else where they're making other people lots of money, and that doesn't do anything for New Caledonia.
Sure.
I think there's a monetary component to it, but I think that there's also a deeper cultural connection that people from the native people in New Caledonia to their native wildlife, and they look at it. I think they have a legitimate point of saying that their native fauna is being exploited off island, and I can see particularly back when. And I don't know if this is still going on now where you have poaching, but I'm sure there was a lot of poaching that was going on. I mean, how do we have all of these species that we have in the hobby right now didn't come from, not all of them came from legitimate collected animals that were brought out or zoo produced animals or anything like that. Some of these that came out through nefarious means.
Well, even at Tinley, I was told that with Eurodactyloides, I was wondering why some of the Canadian breeders who are pretty big, I was talking to them, and I won't say exactly who, they didn't bring the Symmetricus or Occidental, is it? But that was because basically the United States Fish and Wildlife were saying is that during their research, those species were never legally taken out of the wild. At least maybe not to the US, right? Maybe to other countries. And so when they stopped the importation, those species weren't here. We just had Agricolae and Velarde. And so if you are now selling those geckos, if you have them in the US, you can still sell them to other US residents. But you cannot buy them from another country and have them imported anymore. We cannot export them anymore, which is interesting. So to your point, yes, I think, that kind of stuff definitely happened.
Yeah. But I don't think we're going to be seeing this on a table in Tinley anytime soon. I think it's,
maybe a zoo if we're lucky.
Maybe a zoo in New Caledonia. I would be really surprised if they let any live specimens off island.
Especially if it's a very small population.
Yeah, they released the two that were captured. That they were captured and they were collected, so they were killed. And because they were I forget the specific word for, basically they were categorizing them like these were the dominant species of a new species. So they capture them, put them in a jar and pickle them. And then these are okay, this is a new species. We have it preserved. So but they were able to get those off island. I forget where they went.
Interesting.
But I would be very surprised if any live animals of that specific species of gecko, whatever it is. I mean, they haven't categorized it yet. It hasn't been
right.
Nobody's given it a name. They haven't figured out what it is yet.
I just can't wait for more information to come out. I just love this stuff. People want to go and find the newest morph, right? We're talking about morph hunters.
Yeah.
And as cool as that is, and that's all we're going to be able to do here in the US. But as far as finding new species, you want to talk about why people go herping.
Yeah.
Right? think of the high that they had to be on going, I didn't create a new species or new morph. I found a species that no one else has ever seen ever before. I am the very first person ever to look at this species and know, it exists, which is really cool.
I think the closest thing we have to that as keepers, that's maybe accessible, is to get a species of reptile that has not been produced in captivity, or at least not been produced easily in captivity. I mean, honestly, that's one of the things that drew me to Leachianus is, I had been breeding milk snakes for a while, and those are really easy to breed. You get a lot of babies, things like that. And one of the things I liked about Leachianus is that they're hard. They're hard to breed. They're inconsistent in bonding and pairing. You have a long incubation period where lots of things can go wrong, and they don't produce a lot of babies. So I liked the challenge of that, but I also liked the fact that the reward you get from that is amplified. Because when you hatch out your first Leachianus, you're like, I did it. This is amazing. Look at it. This is amazing. Yeah. This was hard. This was difficult. And I think that's
the best things in life are the things you work the hardest for.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's handed to you, it's not worth the same.
Right. Right. And especially back to the point I made earlier too, of like, if you buy whether it's geckos or snakes, whatever, if you're buying hatchlings, you raise them up to sexual maturity, you do everything you're supposed to do to cycle them, to get them to breed, you put them together, you have them breed, it's successful, and then you see a baby. There is no other experience in herpetoculture that will surpass that. I don't care if it's a leopard gecko or a Boland's python. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, if you successfully do that of raising up something from baby to sexual maturity, pairing it, breeding it, and hatching or having a live born of that particular species, that's like the crowning achievement of any herpetoculturist. It doesn't matter what species it is. There's no hierarchy of just like, well, one is better than the other. No, if you've done everything correctly, then someone who breeds a leopard gecko and someone who breeds a Boland's python, it's equal. And I'm going to catch shit for that, but that's I think if
but it's that new life that comes in, and I've talked about this before. But you're right. It's not just hatching out the baby. It's doing the hard work of raising your own babies. Yeah. And going through it's not all going to go to plan. No. Right? No. You're going to have, a gecko that doesn't make weight. And if you're ethical, you wait another year. Yeah. And, or you just, I had my favorite girl only laid, 2 eggs, and I raised her from a baby. Yep. And I'm like, oh, I cannot wait to get 8 babies, 9, 10 babies from her this season. And I got 2. Yep. And honestly, that made it almost even more special because, like you said, with the leachies, if you get 1,000, right, each one of those isn't worth as much to you, right? You still love the experience, but if you have 1 or 2 come out or a limited amount, and all that work that goes into it, it's just that much more rewarding. Yep. So I completely agree. Yep. That's awesome. I think that's also where people can really get, once you do something that big, you're addicted. Oh yeah. Right. We talk about the addiction here, and you're always chasing, you're never going to get better than that, but you're chasing that same high again of what can I work hard to produce, right? And that's where the quality comes in. Yeah. Yeah. Because when you do it once, you can do it again. So it's like and to me that's always what makes it difficult with holdbacks of like keeping holdbacks of just like, well, I made this one. It's amazing. I should keep it, but I can do it again. So I guess I will sell it, or maybe I should keep it. Because going back to very beginning of this podcast, reason I first reached out to you is you have a pair, I believe it's from Paul at Rack House.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another pair that you produce pretty well out of. Are they both pairs from Rack House, or
I
where's the other
have
one?
pairs from Rack House. The core of my gargoyle collection is from Rack House and Dragontown. So Paul Morlock and Mike Soltis. And then I also have some from BH Exotics. But Rack House and Dragontown are really the core of a lot of my gargoyles.
Yeah, and because one's called, is it Murderbolt?
Murderbot.
Cool name.
Yeah.
Murderbot, yeah. Nice.
So one of the parents is Murderbot and Scarlet, and Murderbot is basically a blood red super blotch, and he's actually from Dragontown. He's not from Rack House, but he's paired to a red blotch from Rack House. So again, getting back to one of my earlier points of blending lineages of like, okay, take a really nice gecko from this lineage, take a really nice gecko from this lineage, throw them together, and what do you get? And sometimes you get geckos that surpass the parents, and sometimes you get geckos that don't.
That's the one I saw, because this thing was, I think, maybe 6 grams that you had it up.
Yeah.
And I think I messaged you a few times, like, it was just covered. I mean, this thing was just massively covered.
Yep.
And, at that point, I'm like, I've never seen a gecko go for a few $1,000s. And you posted it, and within a few days, it was gone.
and that was during the height of when everybody was buying stuff.
Right.
And I was like, I should really keep this gecko. But I was also like thinking like, okay, what's I can't say no to that price. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll put it up for that. And it sold. And I was just like, okay, all right. And, on the one hand, I was just like, I should have kept it. But on the other hand, I was just like, I'm going to make other ones. I still have the pair.
And that's the point. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing too, is I'm not interested in growing my collection to be hundreds and hundreds of geckos. I don't want that. I have pairs that I really, and that's the other good thing with a lot of the new Caledonian species is they live a long time. They produce for a long time if you keep them healthy. So it's not like, you've got a 2 or 3 year window and then you're done. It's like, no, you've got a 10 or 15 year window where you can easily produce really nice geckos and enjoy the process. I mean, I have a full-time job that I do during the day. This is not my job. This is my side hustle. So it's,
So you don't have 500 geckos?
No, I do not have 500 geckos. No, I never would want 500 geckos. I have what I would consider probably a medium-sized collection. And
what would you say for breeding adults? You're sort of at ballpark.
For breeding adults for Leachianus, I have 13 pairs.
Okay, that's a decent amount. Yeah.
For gargoyles, I have 2 trios and then another 4 pairs for gargoyles. And then for Chihuahua, I've got 3 pairs of mainlands and 8 pairs of Pine Island.
Nice. Okay. That's I would say, medium to,
right.
I wouldn't say large, because some people don't believe me when I tell them how big large collections are.
Yeah, large collections are crazy. I've got some snakes
they're
too.
massive.
Yeah, I've got some snakes too, but
very cool.
The snakes are kind of my. I actually.
Do you breed them, or are they more pets?
I do breed them. I got out of snakes for a while, and then I recently got back into them a couple years ago. So I have diamond pythons. I have Senzinia tree boas.
Oh, nice.
My favorite species of snakes still is black milk snakes. And
see, you just sometimes fall in love.
And Janai pine snakes.
I've never seen those. You might have to send me a picture.
Yeah, Janais they're a Mexican pine snake. They are butt ugly as babies. They're pretty drab.
Okay.
But they transform over there. Again, it's a species that you got to get them as babies to really enjoy the process of them coloring up. They're a very pretty, and one of the parameters that I've learned over the years, there are a lot of species of things that I would love to keep, but it would have to change a lot of how I arrange my reptile room and keeping style and things like that. So the snakes that I keep have to be cold tolerant.
Okay. Yeah.
So diamond pythons do fantastic. Diamond pythons, you keep them exactly like colubrids. You got to cycle them down to like the 50s, sometimes even colder. Sanzinia tree boas are the same way. You want to cycle them down for the winter. Black milk snakes do perfect in room temperature and then bring them down to like 50 degrees in the winter. And Janine pine snakes, they're from northern Mexico. They're from high altitudes in dry climates in northern Mexico where they get nice and cold too in the winter. So I cycle all of my geckos that way as well. There are people in other parts of the country. You and I are lucky because we live in northern climates, but there are people who live in southern climates where they can't get their gecko rooms below 70 degrees. And then they're like, oh, I'm having trouble reproducing. It's just like, you got them. I think you really need to get them cold. You know, I get the room that I'm in right now in the winter. This will get down to about 58 degrees.
Okay. And that's okay for the geckos.
They do fine. They do fine.
Okay.
You do it gradually. So usually what I do for cycling is Thanksgiving, I turn off the heat. I let it warm up just briefly during the day for a short period, and eventually start cooling it down so that by the time I get to New Year's, I'm at the bottom of my temperature. So at night, it will get down to 56, 58 degrees in the gecko room at night. Let it warm up to like the mid 60s during the day, and I'll turn on some spotlights to give them just like an hour to warm up, and they will run to that spot and then turn it off.
Yeah.
Reduce feeding during that time to maybe once a week. Make sure they have adequate water and humidity, but basically just let them, to me, it's good for them and it's good for me. It's a recovery period of breeding and activity.
That's interesting.
And that's when you pair animals, because they have kind of chilled out to where you can pair new animals where they're not going to try to kill each other because their metabolism is low and they're kind of sleepy and things like that. And then basically around like the end of January is when I start warming things up, so that by mid-February, I'm back to close to normal temperatures, both in the room and in the cages. And that just triggers breeding activity. But it gives it gives me a break, and it gives the geckos a break of recovering from breeding season. Like it's now, we're doing this podcast on November 2nd. I haven't had any eggs. I haven't had any eggs laid in the past 2 or 3 weeks at least. So my laying season is done. I still have plenty of eggs in my incubator, but my laying season is done. And I wouldn't expect to have any eggs laid until at the earliest, probably March. So
I love this timeline you're giving me, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm taking notes.
So it gives the keeper a break, but it also gives the geckos a break. As long as you and you want to monitor the health to make sure you don't see like any respiratory things. I've never had any respiratory issues ever in any of my geckos doing this. I think the key is to make sure that they're in good condition when you cool them down. If I don't think that they are either old enough to go into cycling for breeding, or they've had a particularly rough season or whatever, I'll put them in a different room that doesn't cool down, and I'll just let them.
So, like with your babies, you keep them warmer.
Babies,
obviously, in the heated racks.
Yeah, babies are in heated racks.
So that you don't cool down.
They don't cool down, but they do experience a little bit of a drop in ambient temperature. Because even though the racks are heated, the cool end, if the room is 58 degrees, that front end of the cage is probably going to be 65, 68 degrees. The back is still going to be 78 or so. So maybe they spend more time in the heat, but they're still going to experience a little bit of a change in season. I don't really notice any difference in their growth rates during that cool time. Although I do I do notice that the last clutches of geckos, so the ones that end up hatching in December, they do grow a little bit slower than the ones that hatch at the beginning of the season. And I think it's just because they begin growing in environmental conditions that are just a little bit cooler than the ones that hatch out in July and August.
Yeah, that would make sense. So, and one thing I've been wanting to ask you, and I know we're going pretty long on this, so I apologize, but we're having fun.
Yeah.
You got great information. I am taking notes because just the cooling process is something that I know we should be doing, but I never know. Okay, I like around Thanksgiving time, right? Versus New Year's versus February, and you know, we're in similar climates. Yeah. So this is definitely really useful for me, and I know it's going to be useful for a lot of people to hear this information. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was we talked about you having lineage that produces larger geckos potentially, right? But how do you know, if you have a slow grower, right, one that's born in December, how do you go about growing them up larger, faster without power feeding them and just throwing crickets in there nonstop? Because that can throw off their nutrients. And
I think the key to, I think, if you start out with good lineage that are geckos that have that as babies, they were good growers, they have produced babies that are good growers, then, you know, you're good in that sense. But I think that the key is that I don't power feed. People are like, oh, you must be feeding every day. No, I feed 2 to 3 times a week. Usually 3 times a week, but I'll skip a feeding every now and then, just to make sure that they're hungry, so that when they do eat, they're going to eat. I don't like to waste food.
And they waste that stuff.
They do. But that's the great thing about breeding your own dubia is whatever they don't eat, I throw it in the dubia cage, and the dubia will eat it.
Yeah.
And then that nutrient eventually gets to the gecko. So
I do miss that.
The key to growing them faster is again, like I said earlier, heat and humidity. So keep them in and keeping them in a small box. So I keep them in 6-quart tubs, until for Leachianus, I keep Leachianus in the 6-quart tub until they're 25 grams.
25 grams.
25 grams. Which for GTs, that's a 2-month-old GT.
Okay, fair enough. I'm like, man.
I mean, but even my island locality. So my Pine Islands typically hatch out 7-8 grams. My mixed locality stuff is the same. It's usually between 6 and 8 grams. I have a couple of different.
What are your gargoyles hatching out at?
I typically don't weigh the babies when they hatch right out because they're usually pretty small. If I had to guess, maybe 3. Maybe.
Yeah, I would say 2.5 is a good size.
Yeah.
Anything under 2, I feel like is a baby that's just really small.
Yeah, the ones that I have weighed, they're usually around 3.
Nice.
But by the time they're a month old, they're closing in on 5 grams. And I have particularly the ones from the Murderbot lineage. Some of those grow really fast. I've had customers send me pictures of just like, oh, this is a year old and it's 45 grams. I'm like, yeah, I've seen it.
That's pretty awesome.
That's kind of what happens. But so it's the value of blending lineages. You know, you're either adding or creating vigor in your lines, and you're creating something that's your own. You're saying, okay, you know, Paul at Rackhouse did something great with this line. Mike at Dragontown did something great with this line. Let's throw them together and see what happens. And now it's mine. Yeah. So it's kind of fun that way. But yeah, so small tubs, 6-quart tubs. Okay. Make sure they have access to heat. Make sure the humidity levels are correct. And leave them the hell alone.
That's tough. That is really tough.
So that's like the thing that I try to emphasize to a lot of people is people just like, oh, I'm like, you're stressing the gecko out by taking it out all the time. I don't handle my geckos. I take them out. I do a photo for social media or whatever with it, and they go back in the tub, and I don't see them for a week. I pull the tub out, change the water, change the food, put it back. Yep, you're alive. Okay, good. Put it back in, and that's it. particularly, I think in the first like 6 months, people are like, how can I tame my gecko? How can I get it used to handling? I don't think it's worth it. I really don't. I think the best thing you can do as a keeper is feed it, make sure it has water, make sure it feels safe and secure, and then leave it alone. And if you're somebody who wants to hold the gecko, just wait till it's a little bit bigger. I don't think that you're losing anything on taming a gecko by waiting until it's like 6 or 8 months old. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be healthier. And even then, you're going to be doing the same thing that you would do when it's a baby. You take it out, you show it that being grabbed by this giant animal and pulling you out of its environment is not a stressful situation. It's something that ends well. You take it out, for my babies, I will take them out probably once a week to do a quick weight check and just give them a look over, make sure everything looks good, and then put them back in. And that's it. I don't take them out and like do cute pictures with them and be like, "Oh, aren't you great?" No, put them back in. Because I know that when people get them, if this is the only gecko they have, if it's a pet, or if they only have a couple of them, they're going to want to take them out all the time. And I really try to dissuade people from doing that and say, you're doing more harm than good by trying to tell yourself that you're taming this gecko. No, you're stressing it out. That's what you're doing.
Well, and it's not an Ackie. Okay. Yeah. It's not something that you have to work with on a daily basis to make them handleable.
Right.
Like I said earlier, I just went to a big box store, saw it was probably 35, 40 grams. So not a baby, right? But I guarantee where this thing came from, how many people do you think handled it?
Oh, yeah.
From the box into the container, shipped it. That was about it, right? These creatures are not doted on, right? And wherever they've got mass produced. And so I literally, like, the lady's like, "Do you know what you're doing?" I go, "Yeah." I picked it up. It just sat there in my hand. It was fantastic, right? And this thing was not worked on for weeks, hand taming, walking it, doing all this stuff. And some are going to be jumpier than others, just naturally. You have some geckos that, even just weighing them once a week, this is going to be a little bit jumpy.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's kind of cool about Gargoyle Queen. She gives it a handleability rating.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how she does that, but yeah.
I don't know either, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, just like, in education, I've got some kids who are just squirrely no matter what. And I've got some kids that I couldn't pump energy into fast enough because they're just, and so it's, they're naturally an easy gecko to handle. So I don't think we need to invest that much time. Like you said, leave them alone, let them be less stressed, and do what you need to, but let's try to limit it. And I am not perfect at that, so I'm not preaching. I probably take too many photos.
Yeah, no, I think it's any handling session, if you keep it short, you're fine. If the gecko, if they're able to actually remember and understand that, hey, when I get taken out, it's just for a couple of minutes and then I just get put right back in. And it's like, and they're like, yeah, I probably don't like it when that happens, but it ends okay. And I get put back into my box. And I think, the advantage of keeping baby geckos in like 6-quart tubs in rack systems that were basically created for like baby snakes is the front of the tub is clear, but it's in an opaque rack. So it's not surrounded by glass. So it feels, I think that if you want to try and ascribe some type of emotion to a baby gecko, it probably feels safe and secure because it's hidden. It can't be seen. It knows that it can't be seen. I have cork and some fake plants in each one of the tubs that has some cover. But for the most part, it's contained in opaque walls, except for the front where it's clear. So there is, they can see light, they can see movement. And when I open the tub up, they see me looking down at it. But otherwise, they're pretty secure. And I think that definitely helps, An animal definitely helps with growth, because an animal that is kept in the correct temperature, the correct humidity, is given the optimal food, and is given in an environment where it is stress-free or close to stress-free as can be, you're going to get good results.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. You know, great advice. You know, I've learned so much from you, Rob. I really, you know, I could keep talking with you for another, you know, probably 2 hours here.
Probably,
so I've got to have you back on.
Sure.
I really appreciate it. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully you had some fun. I'm having a blast talking with you, like I said.
This is good.
Excellent. So Rob, where can people find you? What is your company name? Where can do you have a website? Are you on Morph Market?
So I'm on Morph Market as Haneisen Premium Reptiles. And I have a very difficult last name that people stumble over. But it's the spelling is Haneisen. But it's Haneisen Premium Reptiles.
Sounds simple enough.
It sounds simple, but then I think it's because it's the E and I that people look at and they get all goofed up on it. So Haneisen Premium Reptiles on Morph Market. On Instagram, I'm Rob_Haneisen. I'm on Facebook too. The advantage with having an unusual spelling last name is it's pretty easy to find me. So,
yep.
I'll have
that's awesome.
My plan is to have a website up next year. I've been saying that for a couple of years now, and I just haven't gotten around to it.
Awesome.
Morph Market and Instagram and Facebook are really the easiest ways to reach me.
Very cool. And I'll throw up a picture of your logo right here. It'll also be on the thumbnail for this video. So if you see that thumbnail right there, it's a lychee, right?
Yes. Well,
so if you see the lychee.
It's a lychee with green eyes. They don't have green eyes. The person who did the logo was just like, let's make it look different. I'm like, that's cool. I like green.
Very cool. I like it. Yeah, they've got the purple writing. So if you see that logo, you know you're in the right place. And definitely hit up Rob. He's a wealth of knowledge. I'm going to have you back on. So thank you so much for sharing everything with us today. And you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thanks. You too. It's cool being here.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, if you've enjoyed this video and want to encourage me to make more Gargoyle Gecko content, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, share this with a friend, and maybe check out one of the videos right over there. I'll see you next time on Gecko Cove.